Many people know the name Christopher Columbus. It conjures up a few simple images. Determined man staring out at the endless ocean. 3 small wooden ships sailing toward the horizon. For some, a heroic figure. For some, a pioneer who changed the world forever. For others, a symbol of conquest. For others, a symbol of cruelty. For others, a villain in history's grand narrative. These powerful myths often float without context. Some parts are true, many are not. The full story is much bigger, more complex, far more interesting than simple labels allow. Step back from the heated debates of today. Look at the time in which he lived. Examine the world as he knew it, not as we know it now. What he actually did, the skills he possessed, the immense risks he took. The world in the late 1400s was a smaller, more fragmented place. For Europeans, the known world was limited. Europe, North Africa, parts of Asia. Travel was slow, arduous, and fraught with danger. Yet this was also a time of great change and ambition. The Renaissance was flowering. Art, science, philosophy. People were beginning to question old assumptions and look at the world with fresh eyes. This intellectual curiosity was matched by a powerful economic drive. Kings and queens, merchants, bankers, all shared a desire for wealth and influence. A key driver was the lucrative trade with the East: pepper, cloves, cinnamon, silk, and other precious goods. The overland routes were long and perilous, taxed at many borders, and increasingly constrained by Ottoman expansion. Portugal and Spain sought a new sea route to the Indies. This quest spurred a maritime revolution. The caravel, faster, more maneuverable, able to sail better against the wind. Navigators used the astrolabe and quadrant. Cartographers updated charts brought back by sailors. This is the age of discovery, scientific curiosity, religious zeal, national pride, commercial advantage. Christopher Columbus emerged into this dynamic world. He was a product of his time, sharing its ambitions and beliefs. The idea of reaching the East by sailing west wasn't entirely new, but most saw it as impractical and dangerous. The distance unknown, the risks enormous. Yet the rewards were vast. The nation that found a new route would gain immense advantage. Spain, after the Reconquista and unification, was ready to gamble. Christopher Columbus was born in Genoa, a bustling maritime republic. He went to sea at a young age, becoming a skilled and experienced sailor. He sailed throughout the Mediterranean, the Atlantic coast of Europe, the Atlantic coast of Africa. He was a merchant mariner, learning navigation, studying cartography, trading and commerce. But he was more than just a sailor. He was a voracious reader and a deep thinker. He studied maps, astronomical charts, accounts of other travelers, including Marco Polo. He became convinced of a bold and daring idea. Based on his calculations, Columbus believed the Earth was smaller. He believed the Asian continent extended further east than it did. He concluded reaching Japan, reaching China, by sailing west across the Atlantic would be relatively short. This was a radical proposition. He proposed sailing into a vast, uncharted ocean many sailors feared. He spent years seeking funding for the enterprise of the Indies, petitioning Portugal, petitioning England, petitioning France, and being rejected. Finally, he found patrons in Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand. They agreed to finance his expedition. In August 1492, Columbus set sail from Palos, Nina, Pinta, Santa Maria. These were not grand vessels. The crew was nervous. The journey was long and trying. After more than a month with no land, the crew grew restless, bordered on mutiny. Columbus's self-belief and leadership held the expedition together. He kept 2 ship's logs, the true distance, a shorter distance to calm the crew. He watched birds, seaweed, the wind for signs of land. His courage in the face of the unknown cannot be overstated. Finally, on October 12, 1492, a lookout spotted land. Columbus and his crew had crossed the Atlantic Ocean. They had achieved what many had deemed impossible. They had, crossed into a new chapter of history. Columbus did not find Japan or China as he had expected. He had stumbled upon a world that was entirely new to Europeans. The islands he first landed on were part of what we now call the Bahamas. He encountered the native inhabitants, the Taino people. Believing he had reached the outer islands of Asia, the Indies, he mistakenly called them Indians, a name that has persisted for centuries. He described them in his journal as a gentle and peaceful people. This first encounter was the beginning of a monumental and often tragic interaction between two halves of the world. Over the course of his 4 voyages between 1492 and 1504, Columbus explored a vast area of this new region. He charted the coast of Cuba. He charted Hispaniola, the island that is now Haiti and the Dominican Republic, and numerous smaller islands in the Caribbean. On later voyages, he reached the mainland of South America and Central America. Each journey was an incredible feat of seamanship and exploration. He navigated treacherous waters, survived hurricanes, and managed crews under the most stressful conditions. He was meticulously documenting his findings, creating maps, and gathering information about the lands, people, and resources he found. These voyages were not simple sightseeing tours. Columbus was tasked by his patrons to establish trading posts and claim new territories for the Spanish crown. He was appointed viceroy and governor of the new lands. This role proved to be far more difficult for him than that of an explorer. He struggled to manage the Spanish colonists, who were often unruly and driven by a frantic search for gold. His attempts to govern were marked by conflict and controversy, leading to his eventual arrest and removal from power. He had not discovered a new route to Asia. He had revealed the existence of 2 massive continents that were previously unknown to the Old World. This was a discovery of world-altering proportions. It shattered the old maps and forced Europeans to completely rethink their understanding of the planet. The news spread like wildfire across Europe, igniting an unprecedented age of exploration and expansion as other nations scrambled to follow in his wake. The most profound and lasting consequence of Columbus's voyages was the connection between the eastern and western hemispheres, bringing them into direct contact. This initiated a massive transfer of plants, animals, diseases, technologies, ideas. Historians call this the Columbian Exchange. It fundamentally altered the globe. It was arguably the most significant ecological and cultural event since the Ice Age. The world after 1492 was very different. 2 biological worlds, separated for millennia, were suddenly and violently brought together. From the Americas, maize, potatoes, tomatoes, beans, pumpkins, peanuts, cacao. These plants were revolutionary. The potato, for example, could grow in poor soils and became a staple that fueled population growth across Europe, particularly in Ireland and Germany. Corn became a critical food source in Africa and China. These new foods helped to reduce famine and dramatically change diets, contributing to a global population boom. In the other direction, wheat, rice, sugarcane, coffee, grapes. They also introduced domestic animals unknown in the Americas: horses, cattle, pigs, sheep. The horse, in particular, revolutionized life for many Native American tribes on the Great Plains, changing their methods of hunting, travel, and warfare. However, this exchange also had a devastatingly dark side. The most tragic part of the exchange was the transfer of diseases. Smallpox, measles, influenza swept through native populations with catastrophic results. Historians estimate disease wiped out as much as 90% of the indigenous population in some areas. This demographic collapse was an unintentional but horrific consequence of the meeting of these 2 worlds. It was a tragedy of unimaginable scale, really. Beyond the biological exchange, Columbus's voyages laid the groundwork for a truly globalized world. Before him, trade networks were largely regional. There was trade between Europe and Asia. There was trade within the Americas. But the great oceans were barriers, not bridges. By proving the Atlantic could be crossed, Columbus transformed it into a highway. This opened the door to the first era of sustained, large-scale transatlantic trade. A web of commerce began to form, connecting Europe, Africa, the Americas, forming a complex economic system that would eventually dominate the globe. This new era demanded better geography. The discoveries made by Columbus and those who followed made previous maps obsolete. A new generation of cartographers got to work, painstakingly adding coastlines. Mapping the world was a monumental intellectual achievement. It gave sailors tools to navigate with greater confidence and precision. It fueled further exploration. Blank spots became invitations. New sea lanes spurred industries and economic systems in Europe. The vast resources of the Americas, silver, gold, sugar, tobacco, flowed into European markets. This influx of wealth financed powerful nation-states and funded further colonial ventures. New port cities rose to prominence. New financial institutions managed international trade. This was the birth of the modern global economy with opportunities and inequalities. Columbus was a catalyst for this entire process. He was not just a sailor who got lucky, he was an innovator and a promoter of his vision. He meticulously recorded his findings, wrote letters, brought back samples and stories. His persistence and success inspired a generation of explorers, Vasco da Gama, Ferdinand Magellan, who pushed the boundaries further. In this way, he set in motion the chain of events that connected the continents and created the interconnected world we inhabit today. In recent decades, the traditional heroic image of Columbus has been challenged forcefully. Many people today see him not as a brave explorer, but as the man who initiated centuries of oppression and exploitation in the Americas. It is an undeniable and painful truth the arrival of Europeans brought immense suffering to the native peoples. Brutal conquest, seizure of land, forced conversion to Christianity, harsh systems of labor, the encomienda, which in practice amounted to slavery for many. Critics say Columbus was directly responsible. They point to his actions as the first governor of Hispaniola. He and his men treated the Taino with cruelty, demanding gold and punishing those who could not provide it. He participated in and oversaw capture and enslavement of native people. Hundreds were shipped to Spain to be sold. These actions are in the historical record, including the writings of Bartolomé de las Casas, a friar who fiercely condemned the colonists' abuses. From this perspective, celebrating Columbus with statues and holidays insults the memory of millions who died and the cultures destroyed. The critique goes beyond the man to what he represents. European colonialism, the start of long racial injustice and economic exploitation, calls to tear down his statues and to rename Columbus Day are part of a broader movement to re-examine history from the perspective of the colonized and oppressed, not just the conquerors. This push is often labeled wokeism, a term that means different things to different people, but generally signals heightened awareness of social and racial injustice. The movement argues we should not honor figures who participated in or benefited from oppression. They say continuing to celebrate Columbus whitewashes the violence integral to colonialism. A true, honest accounting of the past, this view insists, requires us to condemn, not celebrate, the man who started it all. While it is essential to acknowledge the suffering that followed 1492, it is also unfair to place the entire weight of that history on the shoulders of one man. To do so is to engage in what is known as presentism, judging people of the past by the moral and ethical standards of the present. The world of the 15th century was a harsh and often brutal place. Its societies operated according to norms and values that are profoundly different from our own. Warfare, conquest, the subjugation of other peoples were common practices for empires and kingdoms all over the world at that time, not just in Europe. This context does not excuse cruelty or justify atrocities. The suffering of the Taino people was real and horrific. However, it does help us to understand the world in which these events occurred. Columbus was acting within the accepted norms of his era. The concepts of universal human rights and the inherent sovereignty of all peoples were not yet developed. Furthermore, many of the worst outcomes, such as the devastating spread of disease, were entirely unintentional. Columbus and his contemporaries had no understanding of germ theory. They did not know that they were carrying invisible pathogens that would prove catastrophic for populations with no immunity. To blame Columbus for the smallpox epidemic is like blaming a medieval peasant for not understanding quantum physics. It is an anachronistic judgment that ignores the scientific and intellectual limitations of the period. He cannot be held morally responsible for consequences he could neither foresee nor comprehend. To erase Columbus from the historical record or to cast him solely as a villain is to oversimplify a complex story. His voyages were a pivotal moment that had positive consequences and negative consequences of an immense scale. In the end, Christopher Columbus is a real historical man and a powerful, complicated symbol. As a man, master mariner, immense courage and ambition, extraordinary navigational skills, he took a bold risk many others were unwilling to take, and he crossed a vast unknown ocean. He made choices, some commendable, others condemnable. His actions shaped world history. He was flawed, brilliant, a product of his time. As a symbol, he represents many things. To some, spirit of discovery, exploration, forging new connections. To others, pain of conquest, start of colonialism, profound loss for indigenous peoples of the Americas. The wisest path. Don't choose one meaning over the other. Don't insist on a simple label. Hero, villain. Step back, see the whole complex, contradictory picture. Aim for a balanced and honest history. Teach the full story to our children. Acknowledge he was brave and a skilled navigator who changed the map. Also teach his arrival heralded conquest and disease with devastating consequences for millions. Good history doesn't pick sides. It presents the facts. It explains the context. It makes room for many voices and perspectives, especially those silenced for too long. History is complex because people are complex.